siempre es el causante de la muerte de aquí. Cuando vamos al ingenio a trabajar, le hacen siempre unos chequeos. Pero la verdad no lo dicen tanto como es que sale uno, solo le dicen si sale bueno o malo. Que si pasa o no, nada más le dan la explicación.
¿Y si no pasa?
Simplemente así le dicen, y hay nada que hacer, ya que no va a trabajar.
Cuando yo era pequeño, lo que yo pensaba, ¿verdad? Cuando mi papá estaba vivo, yo quería estudiar, quería ser alguien en la vida, ¿verdad? ¿Me entienden? No ser lo que soy, a lo que soy ahora, ¿me entienden? Primeramente estudiar y estudiar hasta conseguirme un trabajo que no ¿me entienden? Quería otro trabajo, yo no quería estar aquí ahora, pero ahora ya digo yo que ya no, ya están, como dice, las ilusiones ya se me fueron, ¿verdad?
Sí, el futuro es que vamos a quedar ya sin familia, sin varones, solo las mujeres. Y se imagina que los míos son 4 varones, de aquí unos 3 años ya no voy a tener ni un hijo con esa enfermedad. Que no hay otro trabajo aquí, solo en la calle. No hay otro trabajo aquí, solo en la calle.
Powerful. In this area of the world, as many as 50% of the young men are developing kidney failure. We are actively doing a clinical study right now, and we were surprised. We have over 50% of the workers with CKD. And I have to tell you that many of them are only 15 or 18 years old. There's a terrible cycle of sickness that affects these kids. What happens is they start off, they don't have a good education, so they have unskilled workforce, they're not educated, they have limited job options, so they end up working in the sugarcane fields for low wages. After several years, what happens is they start developing CKD, and as soon as they're discovered to have elevated creatinines, the company fires them. They become uninsured. Well, they've always been uninsured, but they basically now have no work. So they put their children to work. The children start going in and working, and then they leave school, they become in order to work, and so it's a big cycle, and it just continues. So let's look at this disease and see if it truly is an epidemic and what exactly could be the cause. We now know that this is occurring in a large region going from southern Mexico all the way to Ecuador. And I was recently in Peru and I saw some cases there as well. It is typically seen in people who are on the coastal regions of Mesoamerica or Central America in the very hot climates, and it is primarily seen among people working in the agricultural fields. And so it affects men more commonly than women in this particular region. There are 2 major areas that are present in Nicaragua that we're going to talk about. These 2 regions affected by the circles, and particularly this region is got the highest frequency of CKD. A couple of years ago, the World Bank supported a very large study done by Dan Brooks from Boston, and Dan went down there and has been doing very careful epidemiology, and we can see that the mortality rates in those regions where the circles were are much higher. The CKD mortality rates, the circles, this area reflects the larger circle, and the arrows, the smaller circle in the region. And you can see that there's a lot more CKD mortality in these regions. This just compares the CKD prevalence in these regions by age compared to the US. And you can see that the percentage of CKD gets up to nearly 50 or 60% in certain regions in older subjects, but there's a very significant 10 to 20-fold higher frequency of CKD among the young. This shows the percent of proteinuria by comparing different countries and regions in the country. In El Salvador and and Honduras, where this disease is prevalent, and those regions where it's prevalent, 30, 40%, 50% of the people have proteinuria. It's in the non-nephrotic range, and it's consistent more with the tubular interstitial pattern, but they have proteinuria in a very high frequency. This is probably one of the hotbeds of kidney disease going on right now. And it's going on there. And there seems to be pockets of this same kind of condition going on in Sri Lanka, and also in Bangladesh, and maybe in Australia. And my prediction is it's going on here in Egypt too. And I would love for any of you who are studying kidney disease here, who start seeing this disease, to contact me so that we can work together on trying to figure out the etiology of this disease. We do have some records showing that the kidney mortality rate is increasing since 1992, and you can see it here in different regions, but particularly note the dramatic increase in mortality rates, particularly in a couple of these regions. There have been a number of studies published on this entity, and one of the interesting findings is that it's seen in the hotter temperature regions. So like even within El Salvador, for example, it's not restricted to sugarcane fields. That's the most common site. But interestingly, if you're working at high altitude or at a higher altitude in the sugarcane fields, you're not getting the disease, and it correlates with it being a cooler temperature. And you can see it does affect women and men, but primarily men. Now, the group at Karolinska, Carl Gustav Allender and Annika Ostensen, have gone to Nicaragua and Costa Rica and have performed kidney biopsies. And you can see here that the pathology is one of chronic tubular interstitial disease. There's tubular atrophy, and there's tubular inflammation. There's interstitial fibrosis, and basically a chronically scarred kidney. With chronic scarring, as you know, and here's some of the inflammatory changes, but with chronic scarring, they will get a secondary glomerulosclerosis and evidence of some glomerular ischemia as well. The remnant nephrons that are surviving are undergoing hypertrophy, and there's some segmental sclerosis that you can see in these fairly diseased kidneys. Interestingly, vascular changes are not present. These people do not have very history of diabetes. They do not have, there is some hypertension, but it's probably associated with the development of the kidney disease and not causing the kidney disease. So these people are not presenting like your classic metabolic syndrome or diabetic. They don't have glomerulonephritis. Immunofluorescence is negative. They're presenting with chronic tubular interstitial disease and non-nephrotic proteinuria, and over time they get small, shrunken kidneys. They are the group that you would normally say CKD, unknown etiology. There's a terrible impact of this disease on the community. We are currently doing several studies down there, and it is a devastating illness, as you saw from the film. It is destroying families, it's destroying communities. No. See pictures like this, it's very sad. So let's talk about the epidemiology of this disease, and let's see if we can figure out what could be causing it. We do know that this is associated with working in the hot agricultural fields, especially the sugarcane fields. In Nicaragua, it gets so hot, the temperature can get up to 110 degrees, 140, 44 degrees centigrade. And the men have to start work early in the morning, and they work until they're exhausted. They're paid very little. They make about $1, $3 a day, and they have to work very hard. Now, people have been looking very hard to try to figure out the cause of this disease. And there have been many possibilities suggested. Could it be due to a pesticide or a chemical? Could it be due to the taking of non-steroidal drugs or known toxins? Could there be heavy metal poisoning or fungal poisoning like this ochratoxin or aristolochic acid, leptospirosis, volume depletion, heat stroke, rhabdomyolysis? All these things have been looked for. And in essence, almost all of them are negative. We're going to talk about a couple things where there have been a few findings. But one of the things that we're now very clear about is it's not due to a pesticide. Even though they use pesticides and agrochemicals in the sugarcane fields, this disease is also occurring in areas like working in mines where they're not using pesticides. And they've pretty much done very good epidemiologic studies. They've studied the pesticides, and all the studies have been negative. Here are two examples, epidemiological connections. And in both studies, they could not find a relationship between pesticides and the development of the disease. And in fact, some studies find that if you use pesticides, you're protected from the kidney disease. And the reason appears to be that the people who spray only go out there for short periods of time and then they come back. And the people who are really getting the disease are the ones who are out there working all day long. In fact, McLean et al. Published a paper showing that the people who are at highest risk are the poor guys working there all day long, the cane cutters, the seed cutters. They had the lowest kidney function before the sugarcane harvest, which is called Zafra, and the largest decreases during the sugarcane. We are doing a study right now where we are comparing sugarcane workers to administrative workers, to family members, and it is very clear. This disease is related to the people who are working in the sugarcane fields. If you're an administrator working there, you are protected. We can show that in the beginning of the day, when they go into the fields, that they have some evidence of renal injury, but it gets worse by the end of the day. And they start to show high levels of this NGAL, a biomarker. So to make a long story short, there have been a lot of studies now by a lot of people trying to figure out the cause of this, and it does not appear to be due to a heavy metal, although there's a little bit of increased arsenic in the blood, or the urine rather, but it's very, very mild. And it's not due to a pesticide. There are some people, a fair number, that are taking small amounts and sometimes large amounts of NSAIDs. So NSAIDs, or non-steroidal agents, are likely involved to some extent. But it looks like the highest risk appears to be related to volume depletion and dehydration. And the way this can be measured is there's a thing called the wet bulb globe temperature index, which is basically factors both temperature and humidity to figure out the level of heat stress that's going on. And they have identified what the 100% limit is, where you're not supposed to work over that limit. And when they went out there, Jennifer Crow, who's a PhD student in Costa Rica, did a study. And I just want to show you this. This is like scary, but at 6 in the morning, it's still tolerable. But look, by 7:15 in the morning, it's already crossing the limit. By 8:15 in the morning, it's too hot, according to this index. And by 10 a.m., they're now under so much heat stress that they are over the limit. And these guys work till like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. So they are out there during a time when it's just too hot. And they get signs of volume depletion. They get tachycardia and nausea and headaches and dizziness and dry mouth. And they also get muscle aches and cramps. But they don't actually get rhabdomyolysis, at least we don't think so. There's in the tests that have been done. So this, one thing that does come out though is that when they get these muscle aches, some of them go home and take non-steroidals. And you can see that here. This point just goes through this. This shows that in this La Paz district in El Salvador, 25 cases of ESRD per 100,000 inhabitants. 67% of ESRD cases did not have traditional risk factors. Of 396 workers, 14.6% had CKD. In this study, and the one we're doing, it's over 50%. The average daily fluid intake, these guys are told to drink water. They bring it out on the field, and some of them are drinking 3 liters a day. You would think that would be enough, but actually I will show you it's not. Some of them are taking NSAIDs, some are drinking alcohol, and some of them have anemia. Many have hyperuricemia, about 70%. And 90% have non-nephrotic proteinuria. The study by the Boston group has found that NSAIDs account for 25% of prescriptions for the 243 sugarcane workers they looked at, and so NSAIDs could be playing a role in this. Some of these patients or subjects are taking NSAIDs because they get crystals in their urine, like kidney stones like you get here in southern Egypt, but these are more like gravel. It's called schistata, and it causes pain, so they take NSAIDs. Some of your patients who have stones and then go on to get chronic kidney disease, it may not be from obstruction. It could be this same entity. This is a study that shows that the daily weight loss is about 2.5 kilograms. They become hypernatremic and high specific gravity. So they're losing about 5 pounds. They're losing 5 pounds a day when they're out in the field. They're sweating off 5 pounds. Some of them are hydrating better. They're losing about a pound a day. They're still in a negative balance. Now, interestingly, many of them are not hydrating with water. They're actually worried about the quality of water from the wells. So instead, they drink bottled drinks. And you can imagine what they like. Soft drinks. Many of them are drinking sodas, or they're drinking juice to which they add sugar. That probably is going on in this country too. Here's an email from a person who was working with the workers as a volunteer with the sugarcane workers in Honduras. She says, one thing we noticed in spending time with these workers is, in addition to the heat and the difficult conditions and the pesticides, is the extreme amount of soda, chiefly Coca-Cola or Pepsi, that they consume. You have probably seen this yourself. The individuals in these communities rarely drink water, but literally have soda at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and for breaks in between. Soda contains large amounts of sugar, and sugar contains a substance called fructose. And fructose is very unique because when it's metabolized by an enzyme called fructokinase, there's transient energy depletion before there's energy production. This is the only nutrient that depletes energy in the cell before it makes energy. And it does so because it causes a rapid depletion of ATP from the phosphorylation by fructokinase. And that leads to degradation of the ATP and the generation of uric acid and oxidants. When you give fructose to an animal, you raise glomerular pressure, you actually raise uric acid levels, and the animals get tubular interstitial disease, glomerular hypertension, and even low-grade glomerular sclerosis over time. But interestingly, and you can show that that increase in glomerular pressure is driven by uric acid. So these are animals that have been given fructose, and they develop both systemic and glomerular hypertension. And if you lower the uric acid, you can block that elevation in pressure. But the exciting part for us is that this enzyme that metabolizes fructose is not just in the liver. It is in the kidney, and it's expressed in the proximal tubule. And when you put fructose on proximal tubular cells, you get a burst of oxidative stress, which you can block by blocking fructokinase. So normally, the proximal tubule has this enzyme in which, if it sees fructose, you get an oxidative burst. And when you give large doses of sugar or fructose to rats, you will get a low-grade tubular interstitial injury within weeks. You don't see it with glucose, but you see it with fructose. And you see this inflammation and fibrosis and scarring. And we believe this is from the fructokinase in the proximal tubule. If you give sugar or fructose to rats with pre-existing kidney disease, you will accelerate the kidney disease. You don't do it with glucose, but you do it with fructose. So fructose does appear to be a nephrotoxin, but you have to take large amounts. So is that relevant to these people in the sugarcane fields? Well, there's a trick, and here's the trick. When you get dehydrated, we know that the serum osmolarity goes up. And when that happens, it activates the renin-angiotensin system, it activates vasopressin, and it activates an enzyme called aldose reductase. Now, the aldose reductase is important because in the kidney it helps in urinary concentration, and it's expressed constitutively in the medulla of the kidney. And that's why one of the reasons you can concentrate urine is because aldose reductase is there, and it helps increase sorbitol in the cells of the medulla to help protect it. But there's normally no aldose reductase in the cortex, and there's normally no fructokinase in the medulla. So that even though the aldose reductase is turned on, it's actually pretty innocent, because the aldose reductase normally makes sorbitol, but there has to be an enzyme, sorbitol dehydrogenase and fructokinase, to actually further metabolize the sorbitol to fructose. But in the medulla, you only have aldose reductase, so you end with sorbitol, and that's safe. But in the cortex, you have the fructokinase. It's like a smoking gun. It's like a Trojan horse. It's sitting there. It's normally not activated. But when you get dehydrated and you increase aldose reductase, and if it's induced in the cortex, then suddenly it's the perfect storm. So what happens is when you get dehydrated, aldose reductase gets activated in the proximal tubule. And aldose reductase, remember, the proximal tubule is normally reabsorbing huge amounts of glucose. When you filter the urine, the glucose in the blood passes into the urine initially, and then it's all reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, where it's safe, because there's no aldose reductase there that converts the glucose to fructose. But if you're dehydrated, suddenly you're going to be converting that glucose to fructose. So the theory is that in the setting of dehydration, or in hyperglycemic states like in diabetes, you actually, and then suddenly you can generate through this fructokinase pathway injury. Well, we decided to look at this. First, we decided to look at it in diabetic animals. And in diabetic animals, in the renal cortex, come from the hyperglycemia, you get an upregulation of aldose reductase and fructokinase, and suddenly you start making fructose in the cortex. And when we made animals diabetic that did not have fructokinase, these were mice that were fructokinase knockout, they were protected from diabetic nephropathy. And in fact, there are now major companies in the US making fructokinase inhibitors for the treatment of diabetic nephropathy. And our group has actually developed a fructokinase inhibitor as well. And we'd like to take it to clinical trial at some point. But if you can see this, it's a very remarkable protection. Well, what about in the fields, out there in the fields? These sugarcane workers are getting dehydrated in the hot climate. Their serum osmolality is going up. They're activating aldose reductase. The proximal tubule is normally absorbing glucose, and now it gets converted to fructose. And suddenly, you've got the injury. And look, if you hydrate with sugar, if the people are drinking soft drinks on top of that, you're amplifying the pathway. So we decided to study this. And in a grant provided to us by Danone, we took mice and we would intermittently heat them up during the day, and they sweat just like people. They actually sweat in the foot pads. And over the course of the day, the intermittent placing them in the heat gets them very dehydrated. So we decided to randomize the groups so that one group got dehydrated during the day, but when they came out of the heat chamber, they could get water right away. And the other group, we dehydrated all day long, and then they only got water at night. And we did it to both normal mice and fructokinase knockout mice. So there's mice that get dehydrated but have water available to them all day long. They go into a heat chamber, and there's animals that get dehydrated during the day and then get water at night. And interestingly, at the end of the day, not surprisingly, the amount of weight loss is about, in this study, they lose about, even the ones that drink water during the day are losing about 8% of their body weight during the day. But the ones that are not getting available water, they're losing 15% of their weight during the day. And it was the same in both groups, the knockouts and the controls. And so you can see that they're becoming dehydrated, and the ones that can drink during the day are drinking about the same amount of water, but then the ones that don't get water during the day drink more water at night, and it's a wash. At the end of 24 hours, both groups that are being put in the heat chambers are drinking exactly the same amount of water. So in this study, the mice that are being heated during the day and can only drink water at night, they end up drinking the same amount of water as the mice that were being heated during the day but can drink during the day and night. So they get the same amount of hydration. And interestingly, here's what we found. The fructokinase knockout and the wild type still get an elevation in NGAL. And we now know that NGAL is really not a marker of renal injury. It goes up with pre-renal disease too. So unfortunately, the NGAL biomarker is not going to turn out to be great. I mean, it is good for showing that the renal function is getting worse, but it doesn't separate pre-renal from renal. And when we looked at the mice, the ones that get water, these are the control mice, normal kidneys. Here's the animals that were able to drink water during the day. Both are protected. But if the wild type animals get water only at night, they start getting significant tubular injury. They get proximal tubular brush border loss. They're showing evidence for renal damage, but the knockouts are protected. The knockouts also don't get a rise in uric acid levels like the wild type do. So this shows that the dehydration is causing renal injury. We always thought dehydration was reversible, but if you do repeated dehydration, you get tubular damage, and it's because fructokinase is getting activated in the proximal tubule through this dehydration mechanism. So what happens if you give sugar? Well, we know that if you give, as I mentioned, if you give animals sugar, even in like a soft drink to them with a mixture of a soft drink with just the same kind of concentration of fructose and glucose as in a soft drink, they will develop renal injury over time. So we decided to do another study. This was done by Gabi Sanchez-Luzada, a collaborator. Basically, she put animals, she heated them up, got them in a hot environment just for 1 hour a day, just 1 hour. And then when they come out of the hot environment, they can either drink regular water with stevia in it, which is an artificial sugar, or they can have a sweetened beverage. And what happens is they actually like to drink after they get out of the hot environment, and they drink about 10 mils a day. They drink about 1/3 of their normal intake in 1 hour. And I'm just going to, because I'm running out of time, we could show that this just replacing with sugar water is associated with the development of oxidative stress in the kidney. It's associated with a rise in uric acid in the kidney, and it's associated with the development of inflammation in the kidney just from the sugar water compared to the control water. So I'm going to just end by saying that we believe that there's a major cause of kidney disease that is going to be probably more apparent and probably is throughout the world, but it's going to be particularly in areas where people are working in hot environments. That repeated dehydration can cause tubular damage, likely chronic kidney disease, and that it's probably driven in part by the activation of aldose reductase in the proximal tubule, with a generation of fructose in the tubule from glucose that's being reabsorbed, and that these animals can be protected by blocking fructokinase, for which I hope that there will be a treatment one day. Rehydration with soft drinks is probably going to turn out to be injurious compared to water, and we believe that this combination of drinking the wrong hydration fluid coupled with chronic dehydration effects on the kidney is what's causing this disease. So we believe that dehydration injury is mediated by endogenous generation of fructose and exacerbated by hydration with soft drinks. And we propose that chronic dehydration may represent an under-recognized cause of CKD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Johnson, for this very interesting talk. And now we have time for a few questions. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you for the lecture. Tell me why you are supposing that the Egyptian should cope with that pattern that you have in Nicaragua. That's the first. Second, in your experience, what's best for the hard worker to rehydrate? Of course, we all know that the soft drinks are very injurious to the kidney. In your experience, the best way to rehydrate the hard worker in the field, if we have some, like in Nicaragua.
Thank you. So I don't know if this is a cause of kidney disease in this country, but I do know that there's a lot of agricultural work in the country. There's a lot of people working in the fields. This is a very hot climate. There's a lot of soft drinks being pushed on the ads. Everywhere I drive, I see signs for Coca-Cola here. I suspect that there are a lot of people who are chronically dehydrated or not, and could be at risk for this disease. You have a lot of people who get kidney stones, which is a sign of dehydration. So I think that it's something to look for. Prove me wrong, it might be not, maybe it's not, but I believe that you're seeing a lot of CKD of unknown etiology, and I suspect some of these cases are due to this pathway. And then in terms of the correct hydration fluid, we don't know. I want to do some studies. I've got some ideas, but I think soft drinks are not a good hydration fluid. And water is better than soft drinks, but it's conceivable that small amounts of electrolytes, I do think you need salt and water, a salt replacement too, and maybe a little bit of glucose would be good.
Rick, why do you call it sugarcane nephropathy when you've got the perfect control, people in sugarcane plantation at high altitude not getting the disease?
Yeah,
So
the name has changed.
It's a heat-induced nephropathy, not a sugarcane.
Yeah, the sugarcane nephropathy was the original name proposed. It's now called Mesoamerican nephropathy, so it has changed its name.
But just to keep it simple, it's dehydration.
Well, we don't know, but our data suggests that it's dehydration, chronic dehydration. That's still a hypothesis.
And all these workers drink Coca-Cola to get rehydrated. Nobody drinks water there?
No, some people are drinking water.
So
Some
you've got
people
the
are
control.
drinking Coca-Cola. Some people are drinking juice to which they add sugar. So we're currently doing a large epidemiologic study. It's finished, actually, where we're looking at the hydration pattern as it relates to kidney disease. And I don't have the results yet, but there's a lot of people that are drinking very sugary drinks, but not everybody. And it'll be interesting to see if there's a difference in risk. We don't know if there is yet.
Could it be simply chronic hypokalemia? Because chronic hypokalemia will give you many of these features.
Yes, and actually some of them do have low potassiums. So that's possible because of the renin-angiotensin activation. It could be.
If you please, Professor, according to the consequences and the algorithm you have put in your slide. So the initiation of the RES system, at the same time the production of the fructokinase and the uric acid effect. So simply, as I know, dehydration in any place all over the world with non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs causing papillary necrosis and analgesic nephropathy. This is one. Second, uric acid, if it is so high, so many people with hyperuricemia drinking 2 liters. I know people 1 to 2 liters per day without any chronic kidney disease. What is the contradiction between?
Yeah, so there, you know, the epidemiologic studies clearly show that if you have a high uric acid, it increases your risk for kidney disease. I have a review on this and coming out in NDT, but something like 20 out of 21 papers show it's an independent risk factor for CKD, for incident CKD. So there are a lot of people drinking sugar who do not have CKD yet, but it is a very powerful risk factor for incident CKD. Your question about, you know, so that was one of your questions. You had an...
the combination between the dehydration and non-steroidals, this is the
Yeah,
first. Second, the drinking of high quantities of cola without any chronic kidney disease.
Yeah, so first off, yeah, there's very likely that NSAIDs could be involved. We have not seen, and there's been no reports of papillary necrosis, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because not all these people are getting good medical
Let
care.
me say it in another way. Uric acid is oxidant and antioxidant at the same time, according to the situation, according to the level, according to the endothelial dysfunction, and so on.
Well, uric acid can function as an antioxidant in the extracellular environment, but the evidence that high uric acid predicts kidney disease is pretty much overwhelming right now. I think that's resolved as an independent risk factor. There's like 20 studies that are positive.
We are out of time. The last question for Professor Sinshasha.
Thanks so much, Professor Johnson, for your elegant presentation. My question regarding the volume of rehydration you recommend, because as you know, there is some phobias in some persons to drink a lot of water, to the extent that many people drink a lot. So what is the safest level of hydration?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So a lot of people drink a couple liters of water out on the field, but the data that Jennifer Krogh obtained showed that the average person is losing 2.5 kilos a day. So you would have to, you know, not everyone's drinking enough to stay in balance. So the study that we're currently doing includes measuring the weight before and at the end of the day, and taking into account not just how much you hydrate, but how much you're sweating and how much you're losing. So it's really true. It's the balance that counts.
Professor Johnson, thank you.